Hey there everybody, welcome to another episode of Bert's Bike. Today we're going to do some modifications to my 2012 Triumph T100 Bonneville. There's quite a bit done to this motorcycle already. The one thing I really haven't touched is the performance side of things, and that is changing the exhaust, doing the AI delete, and kind of some engine mods and a tune and all that kind of stuff. So as you can see, I've already fitted the Motone Odin exhaust to this motorcycle. So if you haven't heard these yet, go check out that video. There's a link in the description below. So in doing that modification though, I kind of changed the airflow of the bike a little bit. And although I think the bike runs fine with just the exhaust swap on it, I could tell that it probably needed a little bit of refinement. Now, Triumph has a tune called the TORS tune, which is kind of a universal tune, but in getting this far with this motorcycle, I really wanted something more specialized and something that would make the bike run kind of the best that they can. So I went ahead and contacted the guys at Triumph Twin Power, and after some back and forth with them and kind of telling them about this exhaust, they recommended their Tune 4, which is kind of, I guess, a stage 1 modification for the bike. Although they said that the TORS tune would run okay with this exhaust, they really recommended kind of going the rest of the way with the modification. So that entails kind of taking the airbox out, the baffle delete, putting a DNA air filter in there, and also getting some more airflow on the bike, ripping out the snorkel, and putting a wide mouth intake cover in. They also recommended deleting the O2 sensors, which is a super simple job. So we're going to go ahead and do that as well. But the one thing that I've been putting off for a while is the AI delete, or the AIS delete. So the way I understand it, it's an EPA thing. There's a lot of information on what that is, and basically the bike kind of like shoots some air somewhere to burn some excess fuel. Some people like the sound of the crackling and popping, but when you get a louder, I guess, exhaust in, you can kind of hear that a whole lot more. And so I figured if I'm going to go ahead and go the whole 9 yards, I'm going to go ahead and try to get the bike to run as smoothly as possible. So with that said, let's go ahead and do that AIS delete.
Alright, so let's get started here. So you can order your AIS delete kits from either British Customs, Motone, or TTP. Or you could source your own parts. I just found it a little bit easier to order a complete kit. I actually used a mix of the British Customs kit and the TTP kit, just because the British Customs kit, the blanking plugs sit flush to the holes that they're covering up. It's also a good idea to have whatever manuals you have laying around, as well as the instructions to follow or to reference, just in case you need torque values or can't remember how something goes back together. Alright, let's go ahead and remove the seat. I have these quick release bolts by Motone, but the stock bolts are Allen head keys, and that key is located under your right hand side cover. Next, let's go ahead and remove the tank. These are 8mm bolts. Let's go ahead and disconnect the fuel breather hose. Unplug the fuel pump. You'll also need a little screwdriver to raise the plastic tab. Next, we need to unplug the fuel pump, and you can do that by just pulling that orange sleeve towards yourself. That will loosen the cable and allow you to slide it right off. Once you get that off, there's probably still some fuel trapped in the line, so don't be alarmed if some fuel leaks out of that hose. The tank is self-sealing, so you shouldn't experience any leakage from the tank at all. With all those connections removed, it's time to take the tank off. Now with the bolts removed, the tank only sits on the bike with 2 round rubber mounts, as you can see here. Lift up the back of the tank slightly and pull the tank towards the back of the bike. The tank should come right off. It's generally a good idea to disconnect your battery whenever you're working on the motorcycle, especially when you are unplugging and plugging in electrical connections. The back of a stock motorcycle should look a little cleaner than this. Mine just looks like this because I have a few accessories installed. Another good idea is to lay out your parts in an organized fashion. That way you can put everything back and know what bolts go to what parts. So let's get this AIS system off. So these tubes are held in by this retaining ring. And on the instructions it says you can just pull this apart, but I found it best to loosen those retaining rings with a little small flathead screwdriver. Now go ahead and just wiggle that hose loose, just apply even pressure and start moving it around. Eventually it'll work its way out. As you can see, a lot of debris came out of that original gasket. Now it's a good idea to clean around this before you take that stem off. Also, it's not necessary, but I removed the spark plug jackets just to give me a little bit more working room. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on the left side of the bike. It's a good idea to put a towel here, that way if you slip with the screwdriver, you're not slipping into your casings. The next step is to remove the hose from the airbox. Now go ahead and seal the hole with the plug provided. It does take quite a bit of force to get that in there. Once I got the plug in there, I used the back end of this tool to seat it evenly. Next, go ahead and unplug that sensor. The next thing is you either want to tape up these cables or use some heat shrink and make sure they are away from the elements. Once you get it all hot with your heat gun and it shrinks around the tab, you can crimp it together just using some regular pliers. Go ahead and remove these two 10mm bolts from the AIS system. You can go ahead and slide the solenoid off. It's only held in there by those two black shims. The next thing to do is use a 13mm box wrench and crack these guys open. When the tubes come off, make sure that the crush washers come with them. Let's do the same thing on the left side of the bike. At this point, it's a good idea to clean off any debris off the mating surfaces. Now let's get the bolts ready. Go ahead and put some anti-seize on them, and a little bit goes a long way. Now since this is going into the engine, what I like to do is just hold the extension bar with the Allen bit on it and just reverse the thread a little bit, and you'll feel it clunk down and seat into place, and then you can just wind it in by hand. I like doing this method because it gives me some extra assurance that I'm not cross-threading the bolt. Go ahead and just nip it up, and we'll come back with a torque wrench and tighten it to spec when we get the other side on there. Now the bolts I used were from the British Customs kit, so they recommend torquing down to 20 Newton meters. So if you're going to use a torque wrench, make sure you use a very good quality torque wrench, especially on these lower values. The bigger torque wrenches don't really work so well on the lower side of their range. Another thing I like to do when using a torque wrench is to start with a lower value and then work my way up to the final torque. So I started off at 10 Newton meters, went to 15, and then the final torque at 20 Newton meters. Alright, so there's just a couple things left to take care of before we button it all back up. You need to find a place to hang the wire that you heat shrinked. and also the bracket for the solenoid. Now you can reuse the solenoid so that you don't get a check engine code, but in my case, I'm going to have the bike tuned, and there's an option in the software to disable those sensors. I also chose to keep this retaining hook in place after getting rid of the solenoid mount. That way I could tidy up any loose wires and cables and just seat them on that. Now the AIS bracket is mounted to the frame on this side, but it makes a nice little mount if you have any accessories. In my case, these are the wires for my fog light. And that pretty much wraps it up. At this point, go ahead and put the tank back on. Remember to make all the connections back the way you pulled them off. Put your battery back in and seat back on, and you're good to go.
It was a pretty simple install. Just put everything back together the way it came off. It's pretty straightforward. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. It's Bert's Bike, and I'll catch you on the next one.